All right, we are live. What's up, everyone? Welcome to a special edition of Creating Alpha in Daily Fantasy MMA. My name is Brett Apley. Most of you guys know me as BB Bomb, and I'm here with two very special guests. I apologize for the technical difficulties. This has literally been the most frustrating thing of my entire life. At several different points, I've been able to hear our boy Joe and our boy Dan, and at several different points, the audio just goes in and out. And so I don't know how long this is going to last. We're going to hopefully we got the right juju here. But let me welcome in our guest officially, my usual co-host, Joe Sun Tzu. How's it going, Joe?
Good, man. Good.
I can hear you. I'm so glad. I'm so glad you're doing good.
Me too.
Our second guest, he was gracious enough to come on the podcast, gracious enough to work through the problems with us, hosting it on his channel now. Obviously, if you're watching this, you're a follower of him. Our man, Dan Levy, Best Fight Picks. Dan, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate talking to you.
Man, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me. Obviously, this is an honor for me, man. I really respect what you guys have done, creating something from the ground up. And this is really cool for me because it's different. Normally, I'm out here talking about from the betting perspective, and you guys are really focused on the daily fantasy sports, the Draftkings. So I have a lot of respect for that, and I'm looking forward to talking about UFC 236 here in my hometown, Atlanta, Georgia.
Well, I appreciate that. And likewise, I mean, consider you one of the sharpest guys in the industry. Again, if you're watching this, I'm sure you follow Dan, but at Best Fight Picks, please give him a follow. I feel like we should just jump right into this card. One of the best cards of the year, one of my favorite fights in some time. Dan, you mentioned it's in your hometown of Atlanta. Just give me your thoughts, I guess, on this card as a whole. Like, what are you feeling heading into a Saturday night?
Man, it's so epic. Just the fact that, look, they had me at Dustin Poirier versus Max Holloway, and then you're telling me Israel Adesanya versus Kelvin Gastelum is also on the card, plus about 11 other fights. So that's all they had to say, and then it's 10 minutes down the street. I'm ready, man. This is going to be epic.
That's awesome. Joe, what are your thoughts on the slate as a whole? You're not going to the event, are you? But
no, look, I'm disappointed. I had a bad surprise. With tax day coming, unfortunately. And as much as I owe Dan, let me give a little bit of a soliloquy here to Daniel, Best Fight Picks. The first podcast that I ever did was with Nick Baldwin and Dan Levy. It was a full fight breakdown podcast. I was able to kind of add a little flavor for DraftKings at the end, but it was the first podcast I ever did. Daniel is either the first or second. Best Fight Picks is either the first or second YouTube channel that I ever subscribed to. Seriously. I think all my subscriptions are MMA related. But Daniel's was like the first or second. Like him and Will Martin were like 1 and 2. And I know Dan likes Will a lot, and he wouldn't be upset if Will was 1 and he was 2. But it was really great. I love this slate. I'm gonna see if I could kind of get a few people to come over and watch it with me. Wife and daughter will be away at a dance competition. Little disappointed in the DraftKings contest, and I think the reason for that is I think because we had some overlays for the Philadelphia card. So normally for this type of pay-per-view, arguably maybe the best of the year so far, you would expect to see 100,000 in the 15, but we're 30, which is kind of like an ESPN like plus card. So I'm a little disappointed there, but I am so looking forward to a number of fights on this card. I think it's very bettable, this card.
Dan, out of curiosity, what is your level of interest in DraftKings? Because obviously our show is a DraftKings show, but it ties very closely with the betting community. Do you play much on DraftKings?
Man, I think DraftKings is unbelievable. I have a tremendous amount of respect for that. Is it considered a game? Because
you can call it whatever you want, yeah.
It's so different than betting. And, at first, when I was first hearing about it, I was like, oh, man, I can pick any 6-fighter lineup and go out here and smoke these guys, no problem. And then it's like, no, you can't. And it's an art in itself and something that I've really grown to appreciate. And also on my show, Half the Battle, we have the Big Marley Minute with Kyle Marley, who's one of the most respected in the industry. And just learning from a guy like that, and then obviously, being around guys like you on Twitter and hearing y'all's show, it's just really opened my eyes to this side of things, and something that I'm very interested in, and I'm still growing at. I'm not an expert in DraftKings by any means, and I love listening to people that really, it's just your approach is so different than what we do with betting, man, that I love it, man. I'm all for it.
And what's also really interesting is you can approach DraftKings from a number of different perspectives. Like Joe and I are on completely different wavelengths in terms of how we approach like every DraftKings slate. I am so much more of a numbers guy, and Joe is much more of a, I would say, narrative. He does narrative-based analysis. Where would you say that you fall in that spectrum?
In the middle. And I like that about both you guys, because I know Brett's all about the numbers. If I tell Brett something, he's going to come back at me with, well, actually, this guy landed so-and-so per minute, so I disagree, right? So I actually really respect that part of things. And then the narratives, I'm all about the narratives too. Sometimes you can get caught up in some bullshit narrative, but one that I always go back to is a fight between Louis Smolka and Mateus Nicolau, where I already wanted to go big on Nicolau because of the stats and watching, the film, and he, stylistically speaking, he had him covered. But then we talk about the narratives. You hear these interviews with Smolka talking about how, he's drinking himself to sleep every night. Now I'm like, oh, now I want to take that bet to the next level. So I fall a little bit in the middle.
Interesting. Well, I think that's probably smart. I'll be curious to hear your analysis on some of these fights. Like we talked about, I know you've been on a ton of different podcasts this week. I've tried not to listen so I could get more of a real reaction to you live. Let's start with the main event. Obviously, that's the fight that I think people care about the most. Holloway versus Poirier. I think we can safely say two amazing fighters. It's going to be an incredible fight. I think it's a tough fight to break down, honestly. So, Dan, let me start with you. Do you have a strong read on this fight? And then from a DraftKings perspective, considering Holloway is near the very top of the slate, 9.1K, and Poirier is at the very bottom of the slate, 7.1K. I know you don't necessarily put a ton of time into DraftKings, but would that affect how you would approach DraftKings just based on the huge discrepancy in price?
No doubt about it, just like with the betting line, because for a fight like this that you just preface this by saying is kind of tough to break down, well, that all of a sudden makes me think that it should be lined a lot closer than it is. So when I see a plus 185 next to a fighter of the caliber of Dustin Poirier, as a gambling man, I'm automatically interested, because I would be willing to take that shot on him versus anyone in that division except Khabib. So for that reason, and then you look at DraftKings, you see that price tag, and it's like, oh shit, that's very cheap. For a fact when he wins fights, I'm sure he scores pretty fucking high, because he's on the KO list for he's on what, he's top 20 on the all-time KOs list in the UFC. The guy is serious. When he wins, he's going to add up a lot of points. And then you look at a guy like Max Holloway. Obviously, I know you're going to get into the amount of significant strikes, not only that he landed in his last fight, but the 4th round of his last fight. But I feel like this is a completely different matchup, because one thing about Ortega, as much as I respect him, I think he's an unbelievable fighter. I think he's very opportunistic. His jiu-jitsu is amazing. But one thing we kind of criticized him for in the past was that a lot of his fights were kind of comeback wins. He kind of pulled these submissions out of nowhere. And, man, it's unbelievable to see a guy with that kind of heart. But with Dustin Poirier, I just feel like his boxing, his striking, just his experience, he's paid his dues. He's been through the ups, the downs of this sport. He's on a completely different level than these guys like Lamas and Ortega, who I have a lot of respect for. But when Max is going out there and, pointing down in the center of the octagon against Lamas, and, he's eating a couple excessive shots in that 3rd round versus Lamas, that 3rd round versus Ortega, that might fly versus those guys. But I really, truly do not believe that will fly versus a guy like Dustin Poirier. So I think we have to see the most disciplined version of Max yet. But right now, he's feeling so fearless. You hear his interviews. He's talking about not only can he clear out the 45-pound division and the 55s, he's talking about I can beat any welterweight, middleweight, light heavyweight, and heavyweight. So he literally thinks that he's invincible right now. And that kind of mentality, man, he could go out here and have the best performance of his career, or it could bite him in the ass, because Dustin Poirier is not a guy that you want to play around with. So do I know the answer of who's going to win this fight? No, but I am a gambling man. You see that kind of number, and I'm gonna go with Dustin Poirier here.
Let me ask you this. Poirier obviously had, I know the first matchup is essentially irrelevant to the current matchup, but Poirier did have success on the mat, and I think that he would have a lot more success in the rematch if he was to take the fight to the mat again. Is that something you expect from him in this matchup, or do you think we're going to see more of a stand-up based fight?
it's not necessarily that I expect it. It wouldn't surprise me. This is MMA, but one thing that I think is a bit of a misconception is people are saying that there's no way Dustin can go out there and match the output of a guy like Holloway. And the reason I disagree is I look at a fight between Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje where Dustin threw over 350 strikes in that fight, and it was in the midst of getting his leg chopped down. So that's proof to me that this guy can put that championship level pace for 5 straight rounds. And that fight barely went past the 4th.
I want to come back to that. But first, let me ask Joe, because I know Joe, I think Joe is on a different page. Joe, how do you see this fight playing out? And, you know, I've heard not necessarily a lot of love that, oh, Poirier's for sure going to win, but Poirier will be in a competitive matchup here. And given the price, I feel like the ownership between the two is going to be fairly split. Like, because Poirier is so cheap, the ownership on Holloway is not going to be as high as we normally expect. Does that change your read on the matchup?
No, I mean, Max is potentially a slate breaker. You know, we all saw how many points he scored last time he fought. I like Max quite a bit here. Actually, I've got it's no surprise. I put it up on Twitter. I have a $500 parlay with Holloway and Kelvin Gastelum. I am also looking at doing a parlay with Max by knockout. And Gastelum inside the distance. I see Poirier having maybe some early success. He's taken a lot of damage over the course. I mean, he was hurt by Jim fucking Miller. Miller just lit him up to his legs. I watched every Poirier fight probably, I mean, I'm sorry, that he's had in the last 5 years. I've seen all of Holloway's fights. I think that, you know, Max always takes a little bit of time to get warmed up. So I would go 3rd, 4th round finish, and maybe there's some interesting round prop bets. I currently see on the DK Sportsbook that Max to win by TKO KO is plus 125. I like that, so I'm gonna be hitting that. I don't know how hard I'm gonna be hitting that, but I will be hitting that straight up, and I will be looking to parlay that with the co-main event.
Interesting. So my read on this matchup is I do think there's value on Dustin Poirier. It's hard for me to recommend a bet on Holloway at his current line, but it's also hard for me to pick Poirier outright. I respect, again, the volume it's not end all be all, but the volume of Holloway is unlike anything I've essentially ever seen. Let me pull up this 290 significant strikes landed against Brian Ortega, and it's not. This is weird. It's not just the pure numbers. It's that Holloway tends to build up his volume. 40 significant strikes landed in the first, 66 in the second, 50 in the third, and then 134 in the fourth. And he does that in several of his fights. Against Jose Aldo, it was a similar similar metric where 25 significant strikes in the first, 41 in the second, 108 in the third. And Poirier tends to be the opposite. Yes, he landed 174 significant strikes against Justin Gaethje, who doesn't have as strong of a defensive striking rate as Holloway. I don't expect Poirier to put up numbers that strong, but Poirier landed 63 in the first, 55 in the second, and then 38 in the third. That's generally how his fights go, the ones that have lasted 3 rounds. It's a lot of significant strikes in the first, a lot in the second, and then he kind of slows down. His power kind of does translate from round to round. Obviously, he knocked out Gaethje in the fourth, but I feel like Poirier's best chance to win this fight will be early while he's fresh, while he can produce those numbers. Once it starts hitting the third and the fourth and the fifth round, if Holloway's still alive, if Holloway starts building, landing 60, 70 significant strikes in round 3, round 4, I don't think Poirier can keep up with that pace down the stretch. And so
worst kept secret, Brett, stack this fight in cash.
I feel like that's going to be like 100% owned.
Exactly. That's like the worst case. That is the worst kept secret on this entire slate, is stack this fight in cash.
And let me go back to Dan real quick. So my take on the fight is kind of that Poirier's best chance is in the first couple rounds. Is that how you see it, or do you disagree?
It's not that I necessarily disagree. I mean, I know where you're coming from 100%. I mean, statistically speaking, you are correct. But then we can look at the fact that Jose Aldo always historically slows down after that first round. Then we can look at the fact that Brian Ortega doesn't have the same kind of boxing that that Dustin Poirier has. So while I do agree with you that Max does get stronger as fights go on, I just feel like this specific matchup, hey, maybe that's the case. Maybe that's what happens. But I think it's going to be interesting, man. Maybe his best chance is early on, but like we said, man, that 4th round knockout of Gaethje is proof that his power does translate into those later rounds. And he was getting chopped down with vicious leg kicks in that fight. I mean, I know you saw Gaethje versus Barboza last week where the fight starts off and right off the bat, it's Gaethje that lands 4 calf kicks on Barboza. That guy, you know, Barboza had the reputation for being the hardest kicker in that division. I think Gaethje has that reputation now, man. So Poirier can go through some shit and fire back. That's one thing I do know. So I'm very curious to see if what you're saying comes to fruition with Dustin kind of slowing down and Max taking over, or if Dustin can indeed push that pace all 5 rounds. But I have to refer back to the Gaethje fight over and over again because 350 strikes thrown. That's my proof right there.
For sure. And I don't think I don't think there's really a right or wrong answer here, especially when Poirier's priced at 7.1K. I can't talk anyone off that. I'm going to have shares of him. I will be heavier on Holloway though at 9.1K. I can't bet against him here, and I think that it's going to give me more unique constructions, whereas like it's going to put me on lower owned underdogs, whereas Poirier is going to be very popular. Gaslam's going to be popular, and fighters like Randy Costa or Mueller or Hayes might not be as popular.
And it doesn't hurt that there's not a lot to love in that upper tier.
Right, for sure.
And that's one thing I want to say as well. You know, one thing that always kind of worries me a little bit is when everyone is on the same dog and this and that. So obviously, you know, from an ownership perspective, I mean, you're 100% right. It seems like not that many people are going to be on Holloway, but I still see that number next to Poirier's name, and it still really intrigues me as a betting man. So, man, I just cannot wait to see what happens.
It's going to be an amazing matchup. Let's move on to the co-main event, and this is one. Again, I haven't listened to your breakdown, Dan, but I know Joe's been all over Twitter talking shit.
So, Joe, real quick, sorry to cut you off, Brett.
No, you're good.
Joe, you like to live life dangerously, parlaying underdogs, huh?
I am, you know, like that first, and you actually picked it. That CR Barahazada when he went against Brandon Thatch.
Yeah,
I mean, that was your free pick. You bet. You said here's a free play, and I'm like, you know what? This guy knows what he's doing. I'm gonna bang that. And of course, you know, we all know Brandon Thatch. I've fallen and I can't get up. Would you like fries with that? You know, like, you know. So yeah. I honestly, I see a lot of parallels to Asanya that I see with Darren Till. I see a guy that's being pushed up really quick. Although Adesanya, if anything, has been way more active. I mean, it's unheard of for a guy this young to have that many fights over the course of 14 months. I think this will be his 6th fight in the UFC over a course of 14 months. Dude's got to be exhausted. I mean, that's part of it. Like we talked offline, Daniel, you and I, about reading too much into that victory over Brad Tavares. I would like to see a healthy Brad Tavares fight Adesanya, and I can't talk people off of Adesanya.
You are convinced that if Brad Tavares had a healthy foot, he would have landed 30.
I was sitting with one of his trainers who was so worried that they didn't want Adesanya to fight. I mean, sorry, they didn't want Tavares to fight. I honestly think, and I was at that fight, I honestly think that Tavares would have won that fight did he not have multiple injuries going into that fight. So
can I say one thing? So this whole thing about Tavares being injured is not a myth. Now, I disagree with Joe saying that if he was 100% healthy that he would have won. I still think Israel would have won, but Brad Tavares was 1,000% injured in that fight. And the proof is just go on the internet and look at those reports that he had a broken foot. Not only that, take it a step further, on weigh-in day, Thiago Maeda Santos weighed in as a backup because Brad Tavares, his whole team wanted him to pull out. The reason he didn't pull out is listen, the guy just got a new contract, and if you guys know what this guy was getting for that fight, not even if you won, just to show up, and I'm happy to tell you guys off air, but if you know what he got for that fight, you understand why he showed up to that fight, because let's just put it this way, he hasn't been back since. He's still living off of that. So, I mean, that's why he took the fight, but then you see it, and that was not the best Brad Tavares we've ever seen. And there's an example in that fourth round where Brad seems to take the back of Israel, but he's moving so gingerly on that foot, he can't even get his hooks in. I have a feeling that if Kelvin gets in a similar situation, he will get his hooks in and he will be able to choke out a guy like Adesanya if it gets there, because even though Kelvin hasn't choked anyone out lately, I don't know if you guys recall those back takes that he has and that rear naked choke in his arsenal.
Yep.
He definitely has that in his back pocket. It's just that he has an 100% knockdown rate at middleweight. Literally every middleweight he's fought, he's knocked down. So, I mean, the guy's feeling a stand-up, but you can't forget that he does have some serious jiu-jitsu in his back pocket.
I'm like you. I think at plus 150, he's a steal. I mean, I love the number. I mean, look, I bet it at even, but I love I love the plus 150. I love the 7.1, the 7K price tag.
Joe, talk to me about what you think is going to happen. Why are you so confident in Gastelum? How do you think he wins this fight?
Okay, so I don't pretend to be the best at technical analysis, but here's what I picked up and how I watched Adesanya fight. First of all, he leaves himself very open when he backs up, right? I've seen many instances where a fighter that had a modicum of hand speed could have hit him flush, right? Now, he's fighting his last fight was against the guy who's an octogenarian, he's about 80, right? The last guy that he fought, he fought an injured fighter before that. A split decision against Marvin, who the fuck am I, Vettori? Rob Wilkinson, carried that guy for a few rounds. Brunson has got like the fight IQ of a turnip. I mean, I don't see anyone he's fought, right, that is of this level. And again, I can't help but go back to the Darren Till parallel. I mean, anybody who thought that Darren Till had a chance to beat Tyrone Woodley, they should roll up their sleeves and we should check their arms for needle marks, because there's no way that he actually had a chance. I don't think this is the same type of situation with Gastelum, because again, there are some distinct height and reach advantages that Adesanya has. But I mean, this is way too much too soon for him. Gastelum is a pro. I think Gastelum's going to get inside of him. I think there's going to be opportunities for him to touch him up. Obviously take him down. I just like Gastelum here.
Well, let me give you guys some numbers. So
okay.
Well, let me preface this by saying, entering this week, I was somewhat planning on picking Gastelum to win. I have not been high on Adesanya really at all. I still think he has defensive grappling flaws. I know he does. He has to. But I just cannot overlook the fact that I feel like Gastelum is completely outgunned on the feet in this matchup. Not only does Adesanya come from a more technical background, he's more well-schooled as a striker, but he lands at a higher rate. He's landed 4.47 significant strikes per minute. Gastelum only lands 3.86, which is not a massive discrepancy, but Gastelum only landing 3.86 significant strikes per minute. In general, that's not a high volume. He has absorbed 2.87 significant strikes per minute. Adesanya only absorbs 2.07. Gastelum, his defensive striking rate, 61%. Adesanya, 69%. And Adesanya has a 9-inch reach advantage. I do not see how Gastelum can beat Adesanya on the feet over the course of 25 minutes. I don't think he can. I think it's possible that he can close the distance, knock Adesanya out cold, but otherwise he is going to be on the wrong end of volumes. He's going to get touched up closing distance. That 9-inch reach advantage is massive, especially when Gastelum just doesn't even land at a high rate in general. So to me, assuming Gastelum doesn't knock Adesanya out cold, and maybe that's what you think happens, to me, I feel like Gastelum needs to have success on the mat. Where you say, okay, Adesanya defensive grappling is a question mark. Gastelum doesn't really wrestle, though. He only lands 0.82 takedowns per 15 minutes. He doesn't even land one single takedown per 15 minutes. In his last 1, 2, 3, he hasn't landed a takedown since Neil Magny in 2015. So he hasn't landed a takedown 1, 2, 3 in his last 6 fights. He's only landed 2 or more takedowns in a UFC fight twice. For him to win rounds against Adesanya via offensive wrestling, I feel like, of course, he's going to need more than 2 takedowns. He's probably going to need more than 3. He's probably going to need like 5 or 6 takedowns to really solidify 3 solid rounds in this matchup. And so to me, it feels like Gastelum has to either close the distance and knock him out cold, or take him down, jump on his back, choke him out. If those 2 outcomes don't occur, I just don't see him winning 3 rounds in this matchup. And percentage-wise, I don't think Gastelum finishing Adesanya is 50%. I don't think it's north of 50% chance. I think Adesanya is definitely the deserved favorite here. And as much as I hate to say it, I'm somewhat confident that he can come through with the victory. Oof. What do you think about that, Dan?
I mean, you got to respect the physical attributes. There's no doubt about it. I mean, if this guy is going to keep Kelvin on the outside for 5 straight rounds and pick him apart, is that going to surprise me? No, it ain't. The thing is that I have seen the openings for Kelvin be able to close that distance. And the question is, how do you close the distance on that 9-inch reach advantage? Well, the last time he fought a southpaw, which was Anderson Silva, in the second round, what I noticed was that when Israel does circle against the fence, that's when his hands tend to drop and his chin tends to go up in the air. And Anderson was able to land, a couple shots. But Anderson's my all-time favorite fighter, but Anderson's closer to 50 years old than he is to 40. And with Kelvin Gastelum, you mentioned how he hasn't shot a takedown since the Magny fight. You're 100% correct, but he also hasn't had to. It goes back to the 100% knockdown rate I've been talking about at middleweight. Every single guy that he's touched at middleweight has gone down on their butt, even Weidman. But with Weidman, there's a different threat. With Weidman, it's like you don't want this D1 All-American / Jiu-Jitsu black belt on top of you. So, of course, there's that threat. And I know a lot of people gave Gastelum a lot of heat for, a bunch of the shots that he ate in that Jacare fight. But my response to that is that, first of all, when you're in a top 3 fight in any weight class in the UFC, I mean, that's what the elite level looks like. You're not just going to run through these guys like Israel has with. Look, I'm convinced Israel top 10 in the world. There's no doubt about it. I mean, look at the way he handled all these guys, but there's a big difference between top 10 and top 3. Now he's jumping into the elite of the elite, and there's no more, they're like Brad Tavares and Derek Brunson will never see a top 5 spot in their lives ever. And Jacare has been top 3 for like the last, half decade. So what I'm trying to get at is that there was a reason why he ate so many shots. First of all, he's very confident in his chin. He's Mexican. Already, genetically speaking, the guy can take fucking shots. you already know this is the case, man. But with Jacare, what's the one thing you got to look out for when you're fighting Jacare? Do not let this motherfucker get on top of me. And then it's like, oh, shit, he throws big bombs too? So for me, it's like, of course he was getting tagged by Jacare. Jacare is, like I said, perennial top 3. This is the deep end. And I just don't feel like I've seen Israel in that dogfight, in a real back and forth fight where he's been tested, where he's had to overcome any kind of adversity. It's all been a show, which is amazing. I love watching him. He's the fucking man. His kickboxing pedigree and arsenal is just something to behold. And there are going to be times in this fight where he's picking apart Kelvin Gastelum. That's just how it's going to go down. I mean, most of Kelvin's fights, he takes shots before he lands his own. What I'm wondering is, it's one thing to be able to give it, but can he take it too? That's what I'm wondering here about Israel, because we just haven't seen him tested on that level yet. So if he passes this test, look, I'm under the impression that he's definitely a future UFC world champion. I'm just not 100% convinced that he gets it done this weekend. I feel like every fighter has to take that first L, has to pay those dues. So I kind of feel like that might happen this Saturday. But if he goes out here, styles on Kelvin, I mean, the physical attributes you mentioned, the strike differentials, all that, it's not going to surprise me one bit. But I've seen this story so many times before with these hype prospects, and I feel like Kelvin's really paid his dues here. So paying your dues. I mean, does that mean that he's going to be able to close the distance, right? They're two different things, right? But I feel like he can feint, which will basically, Israel is going to kind of guess when's Kelvin going to close that distance. And if Kelvin's able to capitalize on Israel circling against that fence with the hands down and the chin in the air, that's one way. And the other way is in some kind of grappling exchange, take the guys back and choke them out. See, I had a false impression of Israel's grappling in that Brad Tavares fight because I wasn't aware of the extent of Brad Tavares' injury. I wasn't aware he was in there with a broken foot. So when I saw, Israel going for that Kimura, he even rolled for a leg lock. I was like, oh shit, Israel's got really good grappling too. But then you realize he's going against a guy with one foot. So I don't think he's gonna be able to do those kind of things here against Kelvin. I think if this hits the mat, Kelvin chokes him out.
So Brad, you like data. You're a data and a numbers guy. So you talk about Kelvin not having used his wrestling. Let me just make a comparison to another fighter who never used his wrestling all that much. Zaleski, Millender. Zaleski had 3 takedowns in 8 UFC fights. He recognized what Millender's weakness was, and he capitalized on it. Kelvin's a pretty smart guy. I mean, I could see him doing the exact same thing, if he doesn't get inside and outstrike him, which I still think is a possibility. But if he doesn't get inside and outstrike him, I could certainly see him. I mean, shit, the guy's got the ears of a wrestler. I mean, look at his ears, man. The guy's got the ears of a wrestler. So I could certainly see him getting inside and taking down Adesanya.
The difference, Joe.
Okay.
I'm glad you brought this up. I wish I had the exact numbers in front of me. The difference is Gastelum doesn't even attempt takedowns. Zaleski always attempts takedowns. He's just a terrible wrestler. Zaleski's takedown accuracy is 15%. If you go back in all of his fights, he's attempting takedowns in every single fight. He's just failing. And so in that matchup, which I'm sure we'll get to the current matchup in a second, I like Zaleski because he's always attempted takedowns, but now he's facing a guy who has terrible defensive grappling, whereas Gastelum doesn't really attempt takedowns. He's attempted like 14, 15, something like that, takedowns in his entire career. He's landed them with success, 50%, which is very good. And that does give me hope that if he all of a sudden decides to attempt 10 takedowns in this fight, that maybe he can have success. I just don't necessarily trust fighters who don't attempt takedowns to all of a sudden attempt takedowns at a very high rate. And
Brett has a legit point because Kelvin has fallen in love with his hands. Back to the 100% knockdown rate at middleweight. The thing is, here against Israel, where this guy's strength lies. Where you might have a significant advantage. I think he might be more keen to attempt them, but for sure, he's going to try to stand with Israel as well.
No, it would be smart of him to attempt takedowns at a high rate. From a gambling perspective, it's hard for me to trust in guys when I haven't seen them attempt takedowns at a high rate before. I definitely think Gastelum is live. Like, this is not a matchup he can't win. It's hard for me to see him overcoming the physical disparity.
So I think we both have to admit that by far Gastelum's the better DK play.
We haven't even talked about DK yet. Well, he's certainly not the better DK play if he loses, Joe.
Well, yeah. Okay. Well, at 7K, first of all, Adesanya is a horrible play at his price point, right? I'm going to have I'm going to have like game theory lineups with Adesanya. That's it. Like, I'm going to have like a handful of lineups with Adesanya because I just don't think he's going to be able to score a lot.
I'm curious about Brett's take on that. Do you agree that Israel is a horrible play on DraftKings, like Joe said, or no?
No, I don't think he's a horrible play.
Oh, come on. Especially
because of there's not a ton of fighters I love in the top tier. I don't think Adesanya is going to be like very popular. The key is this is a 5-round fight. So, like, for example, Adesanya landed 119 significant strikes against Tavares. He scored 96 points in a decision. That's not ideal. And I'm not in love with Adesanya at 9.2K, but I think there's some potential for, if let's say Adesanya wins this matchup, let's say Adesanya has success, that could either come through a high volume of strikes, which could, in 5 rounds, could score him 100 points, or it could come with a finish. He doesn't have the best inside distance line, and I don't necessarily think he's going to just knock Gastelum out. but let's see, plus 254 inside the distance is actually pretty poor.
Yeah, but
I'm more lukewarm on it. I don't think it's a terrible play, but I do think if you're making a lot of lineups, having some exposure to Adesanya in a 5-round fight in that kind of physical discrepancy matchup, I think it makes sense.
Put me in there with the guy with the broken foot, and I'll land 119 significant.
No, you won't, Joe.
A guy that can't bend over. I mean, I think his striking. I mean, that's why I would cut that total in half, and that's what his normal output would normally be. Right in the 50 to 60 range in a 3-round fight.
The problem with using that narrative is that we can say, yes, Tavares didn't fight to 100%, but we can't say, well, if he was to fight at 100%, therefore he would have won. We don't have the second half of that analysis. He might have looked just the same. He might have looked just as bad. Adesanya might have beat him up just as bad. It's probably somewhere in the middle. We don't know for sure, and so I get the injury narrative, but to me, that doesn't indicate.
Okay, give me an over/under significant strikes if the fight goes 5 rounds.
Of what? This matchup?
Yeah, first Adesanya. Because let's assume he's going to get no takedowns. Let's assume he's not going to get any knockdowns. So he's going to have to get the 30 points for the decision plus the number of significant strikes that he throws. How many significant strikes is Adesanya?
In a win?
Yeah, in a win. How many is he going to throw?
I'd say he's going to land more than 100.
Okay, I will take the under on that. So let's say 100. He lands 100. That's 50 points plus 30 is 80. You're not even going to get 10x if he wins the fight. Horrible play at 9.2K. Absolutely horrible.
You know what? I'll let you end on that note, Joe.
Okay, please.
What do you say we move on to some of these other fights on the card?
Yes, there's some interesting fights.
I don't think we're going to break down every single fight, but let's talk about this mid-range, because I think that's where the real money is going to be won. There are a lot of competitive fights, a lot of high upside fights, at least from a DraftKings perspective, and having the right combination in this mid-range, to me, is how you can really separate yourself from the field. So, Dan, I'm going to name like 5 fights here, and just pick one that you would like to talk about first. We got Bilal Millender, Turner Frivola, Joban Grant, Krylov OSP, and Imadaev Griffin. Those are the 5 mid-range fights. Any of those stand out to you?
Yeah, for sure. Bilal and Millender, we got to get into that. And Joban and Grant, come on. Both those fights are awesome.
So I know you and I talked about Millender prior to the Zaleski fight, and I know you're on Zaleski in that one. Was that matchup, because I know you're high on Zaleski in general, was you being high on Zaleski in that matchup because you're high on Zaleski in general, or was it because of the defensive weaknesses of Millender, and like how does that translate to the Bilal matchup?
Yeah, it's a combination of everything you just said, man, because obviously I know Elizu is well-rounded. I know he can stand up and brawl with anyone. So I kind of thought, well, if this does stay standing, we're not completely fucked like some of these other guys that Millender's been fighting. But I was also like, he's a black belt in jiu-jitsu, which is something I respect a lot. So let's get this guy down on the ground. The fight will be over shortly after. And that's exactly what happened. Now with Bilal, he's not a black belt in jiu-jitsu, but he's a brown belt under Daniel Wanderlei. So I mean, he still knows what the hell he's doing. Bilal, here's my little stat. Bilal Muhammad has scored 15 takedowns inside the UFC's octagon. So that leads me to believe that this guy's not an idiot. I mean, this guy went to law school. If he doesn't come out here and shoot, I'm gonna have a serious talk with him. You know what I mean? Like, come on, Bilal. You know what you got to do. But it's not about as soon as the bell rings, just go for a desperate shot across the room, right? I think he's going to have to come out, throw a couple leg kicks, throw a couple feelers. But obviously we know about Millender. It's not just that Zaleski fight. The 3 guys he fought prior to that, none of those guys are known for the wrestling. Thiago Alves, Ciar Bahadurzada, Max Griffin, none of those guys are wrestlers. And they all took him down with ease. So I definitely think a guy that scored 15 takedowns inside the octagon can do that here. And I know a lot of people are comparing this to the Jeff Neal fight. I think that's an absurd comparison. I think that Jeff Neal is a well-rounded guy. I think Jeff Neal trains jiu-jitsu. I think that Bilal Muhammad had a deep entry on Jeff Neal in that first round. Jeff Neal had a disgusting post, a great getup. That's something that Curtis Millender just doesn't have, man. And I'm sure that Curtis Millender dusted off the gi in the last month, but as you know, 1 month is not enough to fix up a whole a lifetime of not grappling. He really strikes me as the kind of guy that, you know, he maybe grapples once a week, right? Like he's not into rolling on the mat with other men. You know what I'm saying? Because he thinks it's you know what, right? Whereas a guy like Bilal, he respects jiu-jitsu. He trains. I mean, he's a brown belt, man. That means he trains jiu-jitsu at least 4 to 5 times a week, maybe more. So Bilal, I mean, I would be shocked if he stands and bangs with a guy like Melender. I know he can for a little bit. And one thing I will say, you know, it's not like, oh, if you don't shoot in the first minute, you're fucked, because Melender actually likes to take his time and let the fight play out before he really starts getting off. He has to find his range first. So it's going to be interesting, but I think eventually Bilal does get him down, whether it's one time and finishes it there, whether he gets his first ever submission, because he actually hasn't finished anyone via submission, or whether it's 3 takedowns. And what I mean by that is 1 takedown per round, and he doesn't get back up 30-27. So either way, I see Bilal doing the smart thing and getting this guy down.
I'm very much with you on that. And to add to your stat, not only has he landed 15 takedowns in the UFC, but his takedown accuracy is 33%, which means he's attempted 45 takedowns. It's not about his lack of willingness to wrestle. When he's failed, it's been about his lack of efficiency. Against what's his face? Against Jeff Neal, he struggled because he couldn't land the takedown, but it's not like he just tried once and failed. You know, he attempted 7 takedowns. And if he attempts 7 takedowns against a guy like Curtis Millender, who has only defended at 53% against very weak competition, I have to assume Muhammad can find success with a takedown, can earn top control with consistency. And once he's in top position, Millender's really struggled. He's really struggled to scramble back up to his feet. Bilal, he hasn't won by, I don't know if he's ever won by submission, maybe once in his entire career, but he's taken the back several times. And I think, Joe, I'll transition to you here. On DraftKings especially, 8.5K, it's an interesting price tag because I don't necessarily think Bilal pays that off in a decision, and his inside distance line doesn't suggest he's going to win by submission, but I think he's really sneaky to lock up a rear naked choke again in this matchup based on the defensive weaknesses of Millender. So what do you think about Bilal, and what do you think about that price tag?
Yeah, I mean, he has not been a great Bilal has not been a great DraftKings, fighter. Although this is an instance where if he can capitalize on Curtis's weaknesses, mainly getting taken down essentially at will. I guess the concern I have is how successful is he going to be in holding him down? Now, that's both good and bad. I mean, obviously, rinsing and repeating gets us 5 points each time he takes him down. So that could be good. But if we're looking for the finish, you want him maybe to be able to take him down, hold him down, transition into something that allows him to get the finish. So I think that pick is not without risk. I mean, plus, look, Curtis has got a puncher's chance. I mean, if he could, Bilal is tough as all fuck.
Well, he's only plus 120. Millender's only plus 120. So according to the betting line, he has more than a puncher's chance.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, I mean, stylistically, that's where his win is. That's where his chance is going to come from. I see him lighting him up, maybe lighting him up, catching him with something and hurting him. And Bilal is just too tough to go down. So he just hangs on for 3 rounds, and Curtis gets kind of a unanimous decision. We were talking about this off air, like, how much do we like Bilal Muhammad in cash? I mean, do we like him more as a GPP play? Do we like him in cash? I honestly haven't decided yet. I am going to pick Bilal to win the fight, just because I think stylistically it's potentially a good matchup for him. And we've all seen Millender exposed. And honestly, turning around after a month is not enough time for him to get any materially better. Regardless of how adverse he might be to rolling on the mat with other guys.
I'm not even sure he understands why he lost that fight. I really don't think he does, because I don't understand how you can get to the UFC, get 5 fights in, and be that porous on the mat. To me, that shows he doesn't understand mentally. Like he doesn't realize how bad he actually is on the mat.
Yeah, Brett's 100% correct, because after that fight, people are going on in social media being like, oh, Elizu didn't want to fight you. He didn't want to stand and bang. And Curtis is liking all those comments. It's like, oh my God, bro. Like, you're in the UFC. Like, you need a ground game, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, Joe, are you going to be playing any Millender?
Maybe just a game theory lineup. It's actually, there are fights I like more. I would actually expand the mid-range to 8.6K because that's a fight I like a lot.
Salmon and Taha?
Yeah, I mean, and again, as much as I like the narrative, I'm not one to haphazardly say that a fight was fixed. But if you watch film on Salmon's loss to a guy named Zach Riley, a split decision loss, that is as close to a fix as I've ever seen in a fight. I mean, I honestly think Boston should be undefeated coming into this fight. And his boxing credentials are so good. And I don't want to steal Daniel's thunder. I'm going to let Daniel talk about Salmon's boxing credentials because I have heard him on a few other pods, and he's got a really good narrative on his boxing credentials. But I kind of like that fight for a bit more upside on GPPs. And I also, and this is where I'm kind of going against Daniel, going a little bit further up the scale, I like Eric Anders a lot. I know Daniel is a little bit on the Roundtree bandwagon, but I like Anders a lot in this fight. I love
relax saying I'm on.
That's very surprising.
Bandwagon.
I like the camp change. I like the huge advantage in athleticism. Anyway, I'll let you talk about Salmon's boxing credentials because you have a really good take on who he's actually faced against and how good a boxer actually Boston Boom Boom Salmon actually is.
For sure. I'll be happy to say that, but I'm not on any Khalil Roundtree.
Okay, good.
But anyways, so Boston Salmon versus Khalid Taha, very interesting because Boston Salmon arguably has the best boxing credentials out of anyone inside the UFC. I mean, this is a guy that boxed Errol Spence. I mean, you guys know Errol Spence. He's on all these main events, on all these boxing matches. Errol Spence boxed Ronnie Rios, boxed Emmanuel Taylor. These are all high-level pro boxers. So just the fact that he went out there and did that, he's a national champ over there in Hawaii. But it's interesting because he had that performance on Dana White Tuesday Night Contender, and allegedly he was only on one leg there. He had the ACL surgery after that. But, man, that southpaw stance, his hands are so clean, the slip and rip game. Not only that, so they were so high on him, Sean and Mick, that they initially matched him up with Hani Yahya coming off Contender Series. That's how high on him they are. Something happened. I think Hani pulled out. Then they matched him up with Ione Barcelos, who is also another top prospect. Then he had to be out with that injury. So now they're like, you know what? Here's Khalid Taha on a silver platter. And I just think this is a showcase fight for Boston Salmon. Khalid's one of these guys. You know, he's tough. If you take him down, he's not going to get back up, but he's also not going to get tapped out. It's one of those situations. You know, he'll lose a 30-27. He's not necessarily going to get finished in that first round. But, man, the way he fights, he likes to throw big bombs. It's going to play right in this Boston Salmon's game. And I think this is the perfect fight coming off a layoff. I think Boston Salmon shows out here, man. I think he's going to put on a clinic.
I'm struggling with this one because I think Salmon's talented, but from like a macro perspective, it's hard for me to back these guys who don't strike at a high volume and don't wrestle offensively. Like Salmon in that Dana White's Contender Series, he won a decision. I think he landed 60 significant strikes. His opponent landed 110 significant strikes. That's a disaster waiting to happen. And I'm not saying that's necessarily going to come in this matchup, but from the regional tape I've seen, that's kind of his style. He's a low volume counter striker. He's got power, doesn't really wrestle. He's asking to lose a split decision. And from a macro perspective, I tend to kind of, that makes me shy away from him in this matchup a little bit, especially from a Draftkings perspective. He's 8.6K. He's got to get a knockout to pay off that price tag. I really worry about the offensive production. Dan, do you think do you foresee him getting a knockout in this matchup? Like, do you think that's his realistic upside?
I mean, I think it's definitely possible, but I think he does win the decision here. I know what you're talking about, and in certain fights, it will be very frustrating. It's going to be like, oh my God, throw more. The thing is that Khalid Taha is going to give him those openings because this isn't like a fight between Dwight Grant and Zach Otto where Zach Otto ran away the entire time And we kind of felt like Grant should have won anyways, but it was one of those situations where you need to engage the guy to really see what he's got. Khalid Taha is going to come right at Boston Salmon, which is going to leave the openings for those counters. That's why I'm confident that he wins this fight.
That's fair enough. What was the other fight you touched on, Joe? Or
Anders Roundtree.
Isn't Anders your boy? Both your boy in real life and your boy Dan?
Yeah, he's cool, man. I actually interviewed him many times, but I had him on the show before he was even in the UFC. So very cool guy. But what's interesting about this fight, because I know a lot of people are saying that Anders should be like minus 400 here, and I personally disagree. I think it should actually be closer than that. The reason why is that I know a lot of people, when they hear me talk about Khalil Roundtree, they're expecting me to have this whole funny speech about how he has no ground game and this and that. But the reality here is that I've actually seen improvements. Let me tell you what I mean. You go back and you watch that Andrew Sanchez fight and that Tyson Pedro fight, and it's the worst thing you've ever seen. I mean, the guy, you take him down, he's not getting back up, right? And not only that, he's up against the fence, and he's not even going for the whizzer. He's trying to get a headlock. It's like terrible, like no stripe white belt type shit, right? But man, in that McCall fight, and I consider McCall to be one of the top prospects at 205 pounds, every time that Khalil got taken down, he backed himself into the fence and he got back up. I was like, shit, Khalil's been putting in work. I gotta give him credit where credit's due, because I used to always trash this guy for having zero ground game whatsoever. So the fact that he was able to get up from those takedowns gives me, I don't want to say hope, but just reassures me that he actually has been taking it seriously and putting the work in. Now, on the feet, there's a huge speed difference between these two. Khalil's way faster than Eric Anders. So what I'm curious about is how long is Eric going to stand before he shoots, and will he be able to get him down? Is it going to be while Khalil's fresh, or is it going to be while he's winding down? Because when Khalil starts to get tired, then it starts being arm punches and stuff like that. But he's so explosive in that first minute. And I truly believe that he's a lot faster than Anders on the feet. So what I kind of see happening is I think maybe in the first round, it might even be a knockdown for Khalil or a knockout. But if Eric can get past that initial storm, I do see him grinding Khalil up against that fence, mixing in a takedown or two. But one thing I want to say about that is just because he took down Thiago Maeda Santos in that fight does not necessarily mean that he's going to be able to take down Khalil. And what I mean by that is Thiago Maeda, for whatever reason, fights to the level of his competition. I didn't tell Thiago Maeda to get choked out by Eric Spicely in the first round. I didn't tell Thiago Maeda to get knocked out by David Branch in the first round. You see what I'm saying? So the fact that Eric took his back doesn't make me think that Eric's this great jiu-jitsu guy. It kind of makes me think that Thiago Maeda fights to the level of his competition. So is it going to surprise me if Eric takes Khalil down? Not at all. We've seen Khalil get taken down hundreds of times, but I'm just not thinking that, he's going to take him down with the first shot and the fight's going to be over like everyone else is saying. I think that there's going to be some hairy moments, but ultimately I do have Eric winning a split decision.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think the athleticism advantage that, look, we got a tier 1 athlete in Anders versus, someone who is like an alumnus of The Biggest Loser. So I don't know that speed advantage, at least what I've seen, is not as great as the athleticism advantage that Anders has over Roundtree. So I do see him knocking him out. I'm not going to debate the improvements because I've seen some improvements too. Obviously I think that the UFC was probably hoping that Saki finished Roundtree so they could kind of give him a pink slip, and that didn't happen.
Joe, did you say you think Anders is going to knock Roundtree out?
I do. Okay. I see the win by finish here.
Because I wanted to ask you, because there's this tweet from MMA Junkie Eric Anders planning UFC restart beginning with, quote, toe-to-toe slugfest against Khalil Roundtree. And Anders replied to it, let's fucking go. And I commented on that, and I was like, that seems suboptimal. That's a joke, but like,
talk is cheap.
Do you think he's going to try and wrestle? Because I know that he's at Factory X now, and he's more confident in his hands. But like, you gotta think he would want to wrestle here, like regardless of whether.
Look, he should be getting some good advice from Montoya. I mean, with Montoya in his corner, I mean, it's better than like Alabama Jungle Fitness, which I think is the gym that he was at prior. I think this is going to be. Look, sometimes you don't see the benefits of a camp change to the second or third fight. But I think, in this case, considering where he's coming from, Montoya has got to get in his ear and say, this is how you beat this guy, and let's move on.
Let's jump back into the mid-range. Dan, I know you mentioned this fight a while ago, Joe Band and Grant, and I have a feeling I know which fighter you are on, but I'll let you break that one down real quick.
My bad. Mute. Obviously, I got a ton of respect.
You scared me. I was like, oh my God.
Oh, no, technical.
But look, man, I got a ton of respect for Alan Jouban. The guy is a real badass. And I've mentioned this on my show, too, that people are always giving him shit for being a male model. And for me, I'm like, well, the guy fights like a man. Why is that a big deal? If you're talking about Elias, okay, then go ahead and give him shit. But Alan Jouban, I mean, the dude always stands and bangs until one man falls. So people giving him shit for being a male model, you jealous of the guy or something? You know what I'm saying? But man, I think he's going to give Dwight Grant the fight he wants. You go back and you see that fight between Zach Otto and Dwight Grant, and Dwight Grant is a counter striker, and Zach Otto simply did not fight. He ran away the entire time. I scored that fight 30-27. Grant, it was in Milwaukee. I mean, look, it was low output. It was a little disappointing, but it's kind of one of those situations where Dwight needs someone to come out there and actually fight him for Dwight to do what he does. Carlo Pedersoli went out there and fought him. You saw what happened. I guarantee you, Jouban's going to come out here and fight. Like Jouban doesn't play games. And the proof of that I have is, when he fought Ben Saunders, I actually bet the under. And, me and Shaq were talking about it. Well, Jouban, he gets wobbled every fight. Maybe this time, he'll dive on the legs, get this to the mat, this and that. But it's like we watched all his fights, and it's like he doesn't shoot for any takedowns. He never tries to tie anyone up. This guy comes to fight. And in 15 minutes with a guy like Dwight Grant, he has the kind of power that he launches guys, he knocks them out stiff. I mean, Jouban's really chinny, man. I respect the guy a lot, but man, he just cannot take that kind of shot. And I see people comparing this fight to the Mike Perry fight. I disagree with that comparison a lot. I don't see what Mike Perry and Dwight Grant have to do with each other. Dwight Grant is significantly more athletic. Dwight Grant has a 78-inch reach, and Mike Perry, I mean, I enjoy watching him fight, but I don't think Mike Perry's that special at all, man.
Can we talk about how Dwight Grant is 34 years old?
Absolutely. And what's interesting about that is that when Jouban was first starting, he was like 33. So it's kind of like the roles are reversing, because Alan Jouban's now 37, 38. So he already had his little run, whereas Dwight Grant, now that he's 34, he's kind of starting out. He's young in fight years, kind of like where Jouban was when he was first starting. Even a guy like Felder, he's in his mid-30s too. So some of these guys get late. He's a late bloomer. What can I say? But I think that ultimately he counters a kick of Jouban with a straight and puts him down.
Yeah, talk about Dwight Grant's sparring partners, Daniel.
Absolutely. So has he had the look of Alan Jouban before? A southpaw that's very kick heavy, that doesn't have the best hands, that's kind of chinny. How about Luke Rockhold? That fits that description very well. So he had Luke Rockhold as a main sparring partner for about 5 years. It's, again, southpaw stance, very heavy kicks, not the best boxing, kind of chinny. Like, that's Luke Rockhold is a taller Jouban, except obviously he's got that ground and pound, that very top heavy game, which is something Jouban doesn't have. But I'm talking about stand-up wise, Rockhold and Jouban are a bit similar. So he has had that look before, obviously training with Cormier as well. I think he's ready here, man. I think he's going to shine.
And I'll simplify this one down from a DraftKings perspective. I really don't know what's going to happen. I think Jouban is a better fighter than Grant pretty much everywhere, but I really, really question whether Jouban can take a punch. Grant hits really hard. He's got a reach. Grant at 7.9K has a really strong inside distance line, plus 157. Regardless of whether it works out or not, I think getting some exposure to Grant in tournaments at 7.9K is a smart play. He's got tournament winning upside. I kind of expect him to be popular. I feel like a lot of people are on the same page, but definitely a fighter I will be rostering in some regard. Let's quickly talk about Turner and Frevola. That's another matchup that I'm really interested in, especially from a DraftKings perspective. I don't think Frevola is that good, but Frevola brings the fight to people. I feel like a lot of people are going to be on Turner in this one, which I am too. I think there's a good chance Turner wins by first round knockout. But if that doesn't happen, I am definitely concerned that Frivola can kind of, push the pace, take him to the ground. And we really don't know how strong Turner's ground game is. Either of you guys have a take on that fight?
Why don't you go ahead, Daniel?
Yeah, I don't have a confident pick, but I have a take for sure. And my take is that obviously we can all agree Jalen Turner has the physical attributes. He's 6'3", 78-inch reach, and offensively speaking, the kid brings it. It's just defensively. Look, this kid's chin is a massive, massive liability. And this isn't just me talking to be funny. Like, the dude, you got KO'd stiff in amateurs, KO'd stiff in 2016, KO'd stiff in 2017, KO'd stiff in 2018. Well, now it's 2019, so don't be surprised if history repeats itself. And with Matt Frivola, he does get criticized for not being the most durable. But the reason I kind of disagree with that is you look at that Polo Reyes fight, that wasn't a chin issue. That was a fighting like a dumbass issue. That's something that can
That's how he fights.
yeah, that's something that can be corrected in the gym, because you saw his next fight with Lando Venata, and anyone that has a question, oh, does this guy have a good chin? Well, how about you take a shin to the chin, a clean high kick, and see if the guy's still awake? And that's exactly what happened. So that's all the proof I need that Frivola does have a good chin. But obviously with a guy like Turner, very long, very accurate, if he's able to land on him first, Turner could knock him out. But I'm not going to sit here and put a lot of stock into Turner's last fight. I mean, he literally fought the ticket usher his last fight. So, what do you guys expect to happen? So I think
Go ahead, sorry.
I think that if Frivola can get this to deep waters, he can drown Turner, but it's contingent on getting past that first round, in my opinion.
It's hard for me to balance his chin issues with his hit ability, because he's been knocked down 4 times in 4 rounds in the UFC. And I don't necessarily see that changing. He's wide open defensively. Like, he survived getting knocked down twice from Venata, but he still got knocked down twice from Venata. And I think that's a trend that's going to continue. So, like, I agree with you that I don't think Frivola necessarily has a bad chin, but I think he's liable to take damage. And that's enough for me to, put money on Turner in tournaments. I'll have some Frivola too. I do kind of think Turner knocks him out early, but Joe, what do you think about that matchup?
Yeah, look, I think that it's a good fight to target because it's got GPP finish written all over it. I would have a few shares of Frivola just because of the aforementioned shin issues that Turner has, but I'm with you. I'm on Turner. The line isn't that wide, is it?
It's almost a pick 'em. It's like
which is surprising to me. Considering both of their respective last fights. So yeah, I'm going to go with Turner here, and I if he does win, I like him by finish.
Well, we've gone on for about an hour. That's generally how long Joe and I go. I feel like I'm about to fade into the blackness here. Before we shut off here, any other fights that you guys are desperate to talk about? Or
I wouldn't say desperate, but there's
that was a poor phrasing on my part. Are there any fights that you're intrigued about enough that you would like to bring up before we go?
Well, I'm actually kind of curious to hear some of y'all's takes on a couple of these fights, because I know Brett has an opinion about these opportunistic finishers, these guys that are losing entire fights until they come back and win. And I know that Ovince St. Preux is a guy that has kind of those similar qualities, like a Chito Vera, where Ovince St. Preux, like, he'll be eating a lot of shots and he'll get dropped, and then all of a sudden he's on top of the guy with a funky submission. So I'm curious about your take on OSP and Krylov, because while I do think that Krylov, he's gone 9-2 since their last fight, Ovince has gone 8-7. Man, Krylov hasn't really patched up those holes in his ground game, man. You saw that Blachowicz fight where he held on to the guillotine without controlling the body. That right there is recipe for a Von Flue choke, but at the same time, he did survive, get to the next round. And Jan Blachowicz is a guy that was in title contention, 1 fight away. Whoever won between him and Thiago Santos got to fight John Jones, whereas Ovince is nowhere near that. Ovince has gotten dropped his last 3 fights in a row. So my question is the fight automatically over if Ovince takes him down once, or can Nikita survive, take it to the next round, and land another head kick in Atlanta like he did when he fought Ed Herman?
I would never in a million years bet on either of these fighters. They're just so untrustworthy to me, and I'm not going to pretend like I have a super strong read on this matchup. But what I will say is that when I went back and watched the first fight, and of course it was only played out for like a minute, and it's not that predictive going forward, but I felt like a big advantage for OSP in that matchup was his physicality. And I think that still exists in this matchup. OSP took him down, Von Fludem, in, I forget what year that was, like 2014 or something like that. And then, like you just mentioned, you go back and watch Krylov's last fight with Blachowicz. Blachowicz passes to side control. He's still hanging on to the guillotine. Like, those holes are still there. And I think I actually picked OSP by Von Flue choke again. Spoiler alert, not with any confidence, but I think there's a good chance that OSP gets him to the ground, passes to side control, and either finishes with a choke or an arm lock. But that's not a confident read by any stretch. Could Krylov survive? He could. I don't really have any faith in St. Preux, but I do think that he's a more physical fighter, the better offensive wrestler, and Krylov has defensive wrestling and grappling weaknesses. So that's kind of why, if I have to pick one, I'm going to pick OSP. But I'm totally fine with a competitive betting line, and I wouldn't be at all surprised to see Krylov clock him in the face.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because I think Krylov is getting more momentum here. And maybe some of it, I don't even know how it could be recency bias because, both of these guys lost their last fight. OSP arguably got knocked out with a second left. Krylov got I thought essentially dominated by Jan, and I was on Jan in that fight. There's a few of our friends, including I believe the sleeveless one, who is pretty high on Krylov in this, and I don't get it really. I mean, yeah, you could talk about the fact that the last time these guys fought, one is a lot, one is all. I mean, I don't see that Krylov has really done a lot to shore up, his weaknesses and why OSP won the first fight. So I'm having I'm having a hard time actually coming up with a legitimate reason to back Krylov here, unless you just think that OSP is so far gone that Krylov is going to be able to keep it standing and win a standing battle. I get it. I understand that narrative. I just don't believe it. So I'm going to pick OSP here, and I'd like to see if he can actually get some dog money.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I also believe that right now at the pick'em price, it's best to just go ahead and pass. But if you did get good dog odds on either side, I do see a case for both. And I think that's the way to go on good dog odds. But here at pick'em, I recommend passing for sure.
Yeah, there's just so much variance in like light heavyweight matchups, especially like these two fighters. Like, really, there wouldn't be that many outcomes that would surprise me. Like, Krylov could submit OSP, honestly. Like, that wouldn't be that shocking. Wouldn't be stunned if OSP knocked Krylov out. And perhaps even one of them can go to the decision. It's only like minus 300 inside the distance, which is not that high for a fighter in Krylov who I don't think has ever gone the distance. Obviously, that's a fight on Draftkings that I'm going to be targeting heavily. OSP,
no, he's won all his fights by knockout. No,
he's got like 14 submission wins actually.
In the UFC.
Oh yeah. No. He tapped out Barroso.
Yeah, he's got a few.
And some other guy. But the thing is, those submissions, it was kind of weird. It's like that shit wasn't even locked in, and the guys were tapping out type thing.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But real quick, before you guys want to wrap it up, I'm looking at this chat, and they want two things. They want our favorite underdog on the card, and they want Joe's take on the chick fight.
Of course.
Oh, man. I mean, let's talk about the chick fight first, because I was really disappointed in Mueller getting tapped out by a white belt who got her blue belt, after tapping her out. As what, a minus 500 favorite going into that fight? I mean, that was really disappointing. With that said, this is like, as much as I hate to say it, because I do like the chick fights, this is a fight to stay away from. I mean, these two women should probably be the lowest owned DK fighters on the card. I mean, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised with either fighter winning this fight. With that said, I probably give the lean to Pollyanna because I assume either her or her camp watched film on Mueller and saw how she was tapped by a white belt. So I mean, and if you want to read anything into that and say, okay, she makes a decent play, I just don't think she's priced well enough, to get a lot of ownership. I mean, at 8.9, yeah, no,
Botello,
yeah, I just don't see it. 8.9K. If this fight goes to decision, I don't know that she's going to earn her salary. So you could take a flyer that she maybe gets a finish. I don't really have. I mean, Mueller was exposed, unless that was just an off night for her. So I don't have a lot of love for this fight as a whole. I wish there was a better girl fight on this card. Unfortunately, there isn't. So I'll just lean towards
you'll still be buying the pay-per-view though, right? It's not.
Oh yeah, of course.
A favorite underdog on the card is tough because it's like Dustin Poirier, like, oh, you should get some exposure to Dustin.
Of course, you know who mine is. I don't even have to say it.
Kelvin Gastelum, like these are going to be ultra popular targets. So, like from a game theory perspective, like of course those are fine. I don't need to tell you that. If we're trying to beat out 12,000 other entries, I'm going to take some risks on that. I mean, we talked about Dwight Grant, 7.9K, Frivola, 7.8K. And then there's just a handful of fighters who I don't see any reason to be confident in, but there's a chance like one of them comes through. Like I'm willing to take a chance on a guy like Wilson Hayes. Do I think he wins? Not necessarily, but if Wilson Hayes wins, I can pretty much guarantee you that he's going to land several takedowns. He has landed 5.15 takedowns per 15 minutes, which is a very strong rate. Pantoja's been taken down a bunch of times by Ortiz, by Eric Shelton, only defends at 60%. I know the flaws with Wilson Hayes in this matchup, but I think there's a chance Hayes can make it competitive, kind of steal a decision. And as long as Hayes gets the win, the takedowns he lands are going to, give him a solid score, 70, 80 points. So that's a guy I'd be willing to toss in a lineup. Randy Costa, I know we joked about him.
Hey, real quick, I want to comment on the Wilson Hayes fight. Dude, yeah. I agree with you, man. I felt like when it was lying like minus 210 Pantoja, that was completely off because both of these guys are black belts. I see this being a very exciting back and forth scramble fest where both guys take each other's backs, and maybe the difference is that Pantoja can edge the stand-up. He is the younger, fresher guy. But, man, we've seen him get his back taken by Ortiz. We've seen Hayes get his back taken by Sasaki. I just see this being an unbelievable back-and-forth fight. So I do understand why people took the shot on Wilson Hayes, especially when Pantoja was lying at such a heavy favorite price. But now that it's getting a little bit closer, I'd probably recommend just passing and enjoying the fight. But there might honestly still be some value on Wilson Hayes. But I'm personally picking Pantoja via like majority decision. I think it's going to be that close of a fight.
Yeah, I kind of have to pick Pantoja only because like I just don't know where else the offense is going to come from with Hayes besides like the takedowns landed. But I tried to hammer this point home. It's about like attempts, right? In his last couple fights, Hayes has attempted like 17 and 16 takedowns. Regardless of the outcome, if he's going to attempt 17 takedowns against Pantoja, that interests me. That means he's probably going to get some. He's probably going to get at least a round. The fight will probably be competitive. It's just a numbers game. So that's the kind of guy I like from a DraftKings perspective.
Hey, Brett, so one of the questions in the chat, and this is actually a great question, this is something that I would ask you, is how much is too much money to leave on the table in DraftKings?
It depends on the contest. I think if you're playing smaller field tournaments or like cash games, you really want to maximize win value to an extent. Like you have to be using Vegas lines, and I know that's difficult because a lot of us come from a betting background where we want to fight Vegas, but in the long run, Vegas is very accurate, and the higher priced fighters are generally the fighters more likely to win. So in small field tournaments, cash games, you're looking to kind of maximize win value to an extent. In tournaments, like if you're trying to beat out 12,000 people, you could leave a few $1,000s on the table. I've seen it's rare, but I've seen people win with, for example, you make a lineup and you have enough money to play Adesanya as your last fighter, and instead of playing Adesanya, you play Gastelum. Like that's the type of lineup I've seen win these massive entry contests before, and that'll leave a few $1,000s on the table. I wouldn't recommend doing that with the majority of your lineups, but that is definitely a way to differentiate yourself. I'd say if you're leaving $300, $500 on the table, that's usually enough. I never recommend specifically leaving money on the table just to leave money on the table if you don't like your lineup. It's a good way to differentiate yourself. 300 to 500 is plenty. But if you really want to get crazy, you're making 150 lineups, want to take a couple random shots, you could leave a couple thousand if you really wanted to. Any
No.
I didn't even notice the chat. The chat's been going crazy over here. I only pulled it up recently. It's kind of cool.
Unfortunately, I think I need to wrap it up soon anyway. But yeah, I appreciate, this was great, guys. I mean, we'll have to do this again, get Dan on, when he's not so exposed. I think I made a crack on Twitter, like, man, you got more exposure than like Mia Khalifa when she first did an anal scene. I mean, you made the rounds, and this is great because this is in your neck of the woods. I'm just upset I couldn't make it down. I'm going to have to make a commitment to do it next time. I don't know if you're going out to fight week. I mean, maybe we can catch up during fight week if you're going to make it out. But this was awesome having you on. And, the format of this show at least is a little different. So you didn't have to, do an analysis of each fight and each fighter. So that's very cool.
So I really appreciate y'all having me on, of course, as always. But I just saw another question in the chat. Should we address it?
Yeah, go for it.
Go for it.
All right, so Ryan Barton wants to know. He said, ask Brett his thoughts on a double stack in cash games.
Yeah.
I was supposed to ask that. I think you can do it. I would definitely prioritize the main event stack. Obviously, Holloway and Poirier are like my two best options in cash games. You can't avoid those two. They're just there's too much potential. You definitely don't have to double stack in cash games. Generally, when I double stack, that means you're using 4 out of your 6 fighters, so you have 2 spaces remaining. If those 2 spaces are like a -300 and a -300 favorite, where I'm like super confident I'm going to win with those final 2 spots, that's when I would double stack. I don't really see that on this card. Like, you can do it, but you're going to be left with like a Jalen Turner type fighter who has upside but is a little more risky in cash games. So I would say overall, probably you don't need a double stack, though I'm always on team stack, and I know Joe's probably pissed off just that we even mentioned that.
No, like, I think a double stack is a bad idea this week. I mean, look, with that said, though, I think that you could actually even stack the main in some GPPs. I would not be totally against that. I mean, especially qualifiers. I could certainly see a double. Actually, I'm going to go out on a limb. I'm going to say, I don't know. I think there's 2, 3. I think there's 4 seats up for grabs this week in the in the tournament. I am going to go out on a limb, and I'm going to say one of those qualifiers is going to be won by someone who stacks the main event.
And again, in small field tournaments, it's acceptable. But if you're trying to beat out 12,000 entries,
no.
You need Poirier, you need Holloway to win, and you need him to win either by decision or like a 4th, 5th round TKO for it to even be possible. And I'd rather maximize, win potential there.
Absolutely.
But, I feel weird because it's not on my channel technically, but let's wrap this up. Dan, thanks for coming on. Really good to talk to you. Really appreciate your analysis. Again, very sharp guy. Follow Dan. If you don't follow Dan, make sure to subscribe to his channel, which you're currently watching.
Best fight picks.
Yeah, subscribe to our channel as well, please. Daily Fantasy MMA. You can follow me on Twitter at Brett Apley, @TTP. You can follow Joe on Twitter at Sunsu. Thanks for watching, guys. Thanks for the support. Best of luck in your contest this week, and we will see y'all soon.